Hey, what's happening? Alex Esmoy here, aka the Data Doctor. I'm going to run you guys through this long-awaited, overdue AI architecture. This is what I use for some of the flows that we've worked on in the past. And I just decided that we're just going to completely open source this architecture, this design pattern, because we're not focused on developing new AI technology, new AI driven solutions. I think that's just not where a lot of the value add is for our current clients. There's still so many companies, businesses that are needing just the basics of getting the data capture, staging, and reporting automation set up properly. That's really where our time, energy, attention is focused. But for those of you guys who are really into the AI scene, hopefully this will be useful, worthwhile. I'm not going to spend too much more time discussing everything that we're working on. I'll just go ahead and dive right into the architecture and show you guys what this looks like. So let me go ahead and share my screen, full screen, and we'll go ahead and shift over there. You'll see that popping in right over here. All right, guys. So I'm not going to really hold back anything today. I'm going to talk through exactly how we look at and have developed and designed some different AI solutions using these different workflows. And this is essentially the big picture end-to-end utility of how we build this out. And I'm going to break down exactly how each one of these parts. This should probably take about 15 minutes or so to just help you guys understand what we look at and why we have it structured this way, the benefits of having this framework, and then you will have to develop your own code base. There's a lot of plug and play solutions out there as well. But if you think about our AI model, and excuse me for one second, let me make sure. There we go. We can zoom in a little bit. There's going to be three main parts to this. One is going to be kind of your UI, user interface component. There's going to be a data ingestion or document pipeline over here. And then there's just going to be the overall workflow of connecting these different components together. So let's start over here with our document pipeline. This is essentially what differentiates you from, say, ChatGPT, OpenAI solution, and what you're able to do specifically with a business, right? So if you have a particular set of data that's unique to a business, you're going to be able to use their data, their input, their unique knowledge base to build your AI solution on top of. And so that's what this is using essentially. So there's all sorts of different data files, right? You can have text files, which is going to be just volumes of text, typically unstructured. You have PDF files that are in that same vein, unstructured data, which just means a lot of text. And you can also have structured databases, so a lot of raw data files, and that can be loaded as well. But we're just talking about text today, okay? And this is the primary use case that I see when I'm talking with businesses, with clients, with my peers in industry that they're looking at. And then raw audio is another input, right? And you want to essentially take that audio file and transcribe it so that you can have text for this next process, right? So in order to turn that into a transcript, you can use something like the Whisper API that OpenAI provides. And this is a transcription API. So you can take those raw MP3 files and process it into text. And so the idea is that whatever your input is, you're going to have to turn it into text. And I'm not going to talk about specific libraries and packages on how to do that. LangChain is currently the best in breed, I guess you could say, that you would use for all these different functions. There's certainly a lot of no-code, low-code solutions that allow you to do that. Some of them use LangChain on the back end. I've certainly written my share of Python script using that to build out this pipeline. So when you have all of your different inputs defined, the next part of this process is something called chunking. So what you want to do is you want to take sections of your text, and because there's limitations for what, say, OpenAI can ingest and process in terms of context, what you want to do is create these chunks of data, right? Chunks of text. So you can imagine if you took a story, a novel, that you want to get the first 5 pages or first 5 paragraphs, and that would be a chunk. And then you take the next 5 paragraphs. Well, you want to do the same thing so that you're able to digest different sections of this text. But when you're chunking, you're going to do something called a overlapping chunk. So what you want is paragraph 1 through 5, and then you want paragraph 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then you want 9, 10, 11, 12, right? And so on and so forth. And you want these chunks to be overlapping so that you're able to actually bridge the context between one chunk to another. And that's going to give you a better result. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very choppy, where the information, the data, the context of what you're reading in is going to exist. So after you build all these chunks and you want them to be overlapping more often than not, you're going to do something called an embedding. And so what an embedding does is it takes that entire chunk and it maps it into ones and zeros, numbers, vectors, essentially. And it's going to use this existing embedding or algorithm, a model, that's going to map it to something called high dimensional space. But for all intensive purposes, that's just going to map it to a numerical value out there. So just like we can map a coordinate, right, using GPS to latitude and longitude, we can map this text into a location point. But it's no longer in 2-dimensional space or 3-dimensional space. It's considered a very, very high dimensional space. So all you need to understand is that the coordinate for this particular chunk is going to have, hundreds of numbers attached to it in order to locate it. So that's going to be how you embed each chunk. After you do that, it's going to upsert or insert it into something called vector database, right? So a vector database just simply stores all of those number coordinates very, very efficiently. That's typically something like Pinecone, though there's FastDB and a bunch of other solutions out there that has been around for a long time for machine learning. And when I say a long time, I mean maybe the last 2 to 5 years that it's really grown and developed, maybe 10, depending on some of the solutions you're looking at. But all these database solutions just store these very, very efficiently. And what's really nice about these vector databases is now you have it mapped to this coordinate. And so when you want to retrieve information, you give it text, it's going to do a similar embedding process. And then it's going to find things that are near it in this kind of vectorized high dimensional space. So it'd be like saying, I want to find out how close a point is or city is to Atlanta, Georgia, versus Nashville, Tennessee, versus Washington, D.C. And if we just pick a random city and we say take Raleigh, North Carolina, we can measure the mileage between those 3 big cities and say which one is it closest to, and then say, okay, this one is similar to such and such location. It's similar to, say, Charlotte, North Carolina. They're in the same state. The mileage isn't too far off. And that's how we would maybe measure the distance. All right, so let's come over here and take a look at the query flow. So this is the next component, right? So when you process and load in all your data and you have a vector database, you're going to essentially engage with this database using a chatbot type model, right? This is the most common form of querying this data, right? So asking a question of the data. So what you would do today with ChatGPT is you would ask the ChatGPT model, GPT 3.5 or 4, whatever, and it would give you a response based off of all the data it's trained on. While that's very, very powerful, we want to use it specifically for your business. And so what you would do is actually send the query to this vector database first. So it's going to do something called a similarity search, what we just talked about, of trying to find things that are near that particular question. So it's going to turn into embedding, and it's going to do that distance comparison, and it's going to try to find documents or chunks that are very, very close to it, to the question that you ask. And then what it's going to do is then take, and this is where how you code these models become really, really important, and how you structure this. But it's going to essentially take that chunk or those multiple chunks that match up to your question, and it's going to use that to feed back into your GPT 3.5 or 4 prompt. And it's going to take that question plus those chunks and use that as context to ask GPT what is the answer to this question using this information. So this would be the same as you asking a person, hey, I'd like you to, tell me about how Google search works, or the performance of this company given these last 3 years of financials, right? If I give you that background data, then you can look through those numbers and then give me a more informed answer versus, what's the performance of Apple, recently. And you might be able to look up the share price or something, or you might not know off the top of your head. You're like, well, I'm just going to guess based off of what I remember. And that's what we're getting when we're asking ChatGPT an answer. It's giving you a guess based off of what it's remembered in the past. So if we give it more relevant, more current data and information, then these documents are going to help it make a more informed response. And so that's what we're doing over here with the query flow. And then the final component over here is when you want to wrap it up for a user interface, right? This is how you're going to actually make the tool useful for other people. And there's already a lot of no-code, low-code solutions like BotPress, which I really, really love. And essentially, you can build that into those systems. They've already got some of these prompting set up. You still have to do your ingestion pipeline kind of outside of that. But what I really like is the Streamlit library, right? This is a very popular library that's just come out that allows you to build essentially a Flask application if you're familiar with that framework. And it uses Python. And it's very, very efficient with what you can program in terms of how quickly you can get to a user interface front end. And I like to think about it in terms of you want to get your environmental file configured and load in all of those secret keys, everything that you need to manage. Have that kind of on the back end, a little bit hidden and loading into your system environmental variables. Then you have these utilities that are going to link in LangChain and other types of processes that you need, so semantic search. You're going to have your actual application that's going to make calls to your utilities, and this is going to manage your user interface. This is how you design your app. And so if you want to get to an app very, very quickly, these are the structures that you want to think about. And then finally, I would store the prompts in a separate file, right? I would store it in my prompts.py. And this is how you would construct the different templates for how you want to structure your query to ChatGPT and using these APIs. And I really enjoy using the chat version versus the default kind of single prompt version, right? Because there's a difference in what you can supply in terms of context and the amount of information you can give it. So once when you define the roles, the goals, the context reference, which is going to be, the input from your chunks over here, then you're going to submit this human query, which is your original query, and that's going to essentially give you all of the information that you want. So that is how I would design the system end to end. If you have any other questions about this format and how to utilize this framework, happy to answer those questions in the comments and chat down below. But this has been something that we've used for probably the past 2.5, 3 months now. Built multiple applications in the AI space, some for internal use, some for external, and some for our clients. And I think it's really, really powerful. But again, I'm choosing to really move away from this because I think that open source technology is evolving so fast in this AI space that even this type of workflow, the competitive advantage that we're going to maintain here is pretty much non-existent. I think there's fantastic tools that allow you to point and click, drag and drop, get to an answer very, very quickly. Happy to help with implementation if this is a solution that's going to add value to an organization. But I'll go back to my thought is that majority of the clients that we're working in with what we're doing with Data Doctor and the people that we serve are going to be more manufacturing or service-based companies that maybe just don't have the data and reporting capacities in-house. And we want to support those. Those are going to be our bread and butter where we choose to play. That's kind of where our strategy is focused on. And while this AI technology is very impressive and very useful for a lot of companies, it's just not something that we're focusing our time and attention on today. And so I want to just provide this out there as a resource for those of you guys who see the value in it and want to use it, whether you're a large corporate entity or a AI automation agency, AAA, which is really, really popular these days. Hopefully this is helping you. You guys can build a business around it, use this technology. There's so many resources out there available. And I certainly don't want to contribute to noise or soak up too much time spending time and energy developing solutions in this space when there's clearly just abundance of it out there. So that's my time for today. Hopefully that you guys found this useful. This is probably the last piece of content that I'm going to develop on AI as it relates to chatbots. It might come up in the future. Certainly still excited about the technology, still use it in terms of augmentation for the work that we're doing in terms of developing code, developing SQL, and developing solutions for our clients. It's just not a space that I think is going to be where we continue to build out solutions in the near term. So hopefully this has been helpful for you guys. And until next time, take care and God bless.